Imagine being told day after day by the very people you trust most that there is something fundamentally wrong with you. That your words are horrible, that you're starting to stutter, that you should not open your mouth unless you can speak perfectly. Now imagine this happening to you not as an adult who can fight back, but as a small, defenseless child with no parents to protect you. Today, we're diving into one of the most morally bankrupt studies in the history of psychology, an experiment so cruel its own subjects named it later the monster study. Conducted in 1939 on 22 orphans, this study proved how easily authority and repetition can program the human mind, leaving scars that can last a lifetime. The monster study was led by Dr. Wendell Johnson, one of the nation's leading speech experts at the University of Iowa. Johnson himself had struggled with stuttering and he wanted to prove his controversial theory. Stuttering was not a physical defect but a learned behavior. He called it a diagnosogenic theory. Stuttering, he believed, begins not in the child's mouth but in the parent's ears. It was an ambitious idea, and to test it, Johnson sacrificed the innocence of children. Johnson's graduate student, Mary Tudor, carried out the work at the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans Home in Davenport. Why orphans? Because they were the most vulnerable. No parents to give consent, no family to defend them. Just children, ages 5 to 16, who trusted the adults in charge. The staff were told this was speech therapy. The children believed they were being helped. In reality, it was systematic psychological sabotage. The children were divided into groups, and the most horrifying was Group A, the normal speakers. These 6 children had no stutter, no speech problems at all. For months, they were subjected to relentless psychological attack. They were told their speech was horrible. They were told they were beginning to stutter. And they were warned not to speak unless it was perfect. They were criticized for every hesitation, every pause, every imperfection. Imagine a 5-year-old trying to answer a question, whispering, too afraid to speak, watching the adult's face for disapproval. That was the experiment. The damage was immediate. The children who had once spoken freely, now they whispered instead of speaking, gave one-word replies, stopped talking altogether when they were anxious, showed visible shame and loss of confidence. The experiment in itself did not create full clinical stutters, but it did something worse. It convinced healthy children that they were broken. It rewired their self-perception. Decades later, survivors described crippling anxiety and lifelong struggles with confidence. Mary Nixon said she became reclusive, avoiding speaking situations. This was not science. It was psychological scouring dressed up as research. The University of Iowa buried this study for decades. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the story emerged and surviving subjects, now elderly, sued the state of Iowa. In 2007, the state settled, paying nearly $1 million to 7 surviving victims. But by then, the damage was permanent. No amount of money could give back a stolen childhood. The monster study is the darkest proof of the self-fulfilling prophecy. When someone in authority gives you a label, you start to live it. The children were not broken, but the label stutterer, repeated by a trusted authority, became their reality. As a real-life example, imagine the kid told you're not a math person. It tends to internalize it, and anxiety tends to rise, motivation falls, performance drops, not because they lack the ability, but because they accepted the label. Or in toxic relationships, partners use relentless criticism to destroy self-esteem. The same method Tudor used on those children. Authority plus repetition equals control. But the real truth is, criticism only has power if you let it define your identity. Those orphans believed the scientists were helping them. That trust made them defenseless against the lie. Now here's the insight most people miss from this study. The real danger, it was not the insult, it was the authority behind them. If a playground bully called those kids stutterers, they might have ignored it. But when the word came from the adults with authority, framed as therapy, the children believed them. That's the terrifying lesson. Human beings are programmable. Authority plus repetition can make you rewrite your reality, whether it's a child convinced they stutter, an employee convinced they are incompetent, or a citizen convinced that propaganda is truth. The monster study didn't just expose cruelty, it exposed how frighteningly easy it is to rewrite someone's identity when you control the story. How do you defend yourself from becoming a victim of the monster study in your own life? Next time someone criticizes you, ask yourself, does this person have authority in this domain? A boss might judge your work performance, but not your worth as a person. Are they labeling my actions or my identity? This report was late. This is a fact. You are lazy. This is programming. What can you do? Demand evidence. If someone calls your work horrible, ask what metric are you using? Force them to move from emotional attack to a factual critic. Affirm your competence. Keep an evidence file of your successes, big and small. When criticism shakes you, consult it. Replace their lie with your truth. Lastly, choose your self-definition. A single failure does not define you. A single label doesn't define you. You decide who you are. The act of agency is the firewall against psychological programming. The monster study remains one of the psychologist's darkest chapters, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. It proved how fragile identity is and how authority can weaponize words to destroy self-worth. The lesson for us today is clear. Words can program you, but only if you surrender your right to define yourself. Never give that away. If you find this story interesting, please subscribe to The Dark Mirror. I'll see you next time.